Minister for Justice, Mr. Nicholson, transmitted to Mr. Emery and his counsel, Mr. Donaldson QC, information that the minister had ordered the unconditional surrender of Mark Emery for extradition to the United States. Effectively, that ends what's called the political phase of the extradition process. The next step is to make arrangements for Mr. Emery's physical transport to the United States, where he will enter a guilty plea in accordance with a pre-existing plea arrangement that had been worked out between Mr. Donaldson and the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Mr. Greenberg.
Jody talked about having two other elements added on to that plea. In essence, he's going down to face 3 charges. Is that correct? Is that understand?
Yeah, what happened was originally when the extradition was filed, Mr. Emery and his colleagues, Mr. Williams and Ms. Rainey, were sought on 3 charges: conspiracy to manufacture marijuana, conspiracy to distribute marijuana seeds, and conspiracy to launder the proceeds of crime. The plea bargain has him pleading guilty to one offense, a lesser included offense, which carries with it no mandatory minimum jail sentence. Those 3 offenses all had 10-year mandatory minimums. Mr. Donaldson, Mr. Emery's counsel, had submitted to the minister that Mr. Emery ought to only be extradited to face that one lesser included count. The Minister for Justice ordered the surrender unconditionally, meaning that he has been surrendered to face all 3 of the original charges. Now, as a practical matter, because there is a plea bargain in place, and we expect both the United States and Mr. Emery to honor that plea bargain to the lesser included charge, I'm not sure it makes a difference, but as a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and just because I think it's the right thing to do, Mr. Donaldson had said to the minister, look, he's agreed to plead guilty to this charge. Americans only want him to plead guilty to that lesser charge. Why not surrender him only on that lesser charge, just in case something goes wrong?
And is that what he's submitted that question to him today in light of this? Or
he submitted that question many months ago, and today we learned that the Minister of Justice was not going to accede to that request and was instead going to surrender Mr. Emery unconditionally on all 3 of the original charges.
So does that mean he will be facing those 3 charges, or is it still up to the United States to live up to their end of the deal on that?
It's up to the United States to live up to their end of the arrangement. I have every confidence that they'll do that. Certainly Mr. Emery has done everything that he has promised that he would do, and we anticipate that they'll be before a judge sometime in the relatively near future, putting a guilty plea on the record to the lesser included charge, and in all likelihood being sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Disappointed by the minister's decision today?
I'm deeply disappointed by the minister's decision today. I think that most Canadians are disappointed by the minister's decision today. This is not an extradition that was popular. It's not an extradition that was supported. In fact, it's unprecedented in terms of the level of opposition to this extradition, with members of the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, the New Democratic Party tabling petitions opposing the extradition, signed by tens of thousands of Canadians in the House of Commons. And so I'm deeply disappointed. I think that it's a real blow to our conception of Canadian sovereignty. Mr. Emery never went to the United States. Mr. Emery didn't defraud anyone in the United States. Mr. Emery sat in Vancouver, committed crimes that are illegal both in Canada and the United States, and it's been our position all along, and Mr. Emery's position all along, that if he's going to be prosecuted, he should be prosecuted here in his country, in Canada, and he was perfectly willing to succumb to the criminal justice system here in Canada.
What does it say? What do you think the motivation is for the decision today?
Well, it's hard to say what the motivation is. Certainly the Conservative government in Ottawa, Mr. Harper's drug war that he's bringing in politically and has been bringing in for the last few years politically demonstrates that the Conservative government is ideologically fixated on transforming in a radical way Canadian criminal justice policy when it comes to drug issues. The unfortunate thing is that we know that that's going to fail. We know it's going to fail spectacularly. We know it's going to cause overcrowded prisons, a price tag in the tens of billions of dollars, and probably increased crime, increased violence, increased danger on the drug markets here on our streets. It's really ironic that just as the Americans are retreating from the drug war approach because it's been such a spectacular failure over the last 40 years there, Canada's poised to take up the mantle and bring in those failed and harmful policies. It's a tragic irony, and it's one that I think Canadians should be outraged about.
What's the time frame from here on in? What do we expect to see when he'll go to the States? Is there any opportunity for appeal before the process?
He technically has the right to seek judicial review of the minister's decision today. I don't anticipate that will occur. Of course, I'm not his lead counsel in those proceedings, so I can't speak to that. In terms of timeline, if judicial review is not sought, and he has 30 days to make that decision, I rather anticipate that it'll take a couple of weeks to get the bodies in place and the paperwork in place to actually physically bring him to the United States of America. When he's brought there, he'll be incarcerated pending the plea and sentence at SeaTac. When he is sentenced, he'll then be in the custody of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. We don't know where he'll end up physically, but that is at the point at which he can then seek a treaty transfer back to Canada to serve his time here. There is a treaty between the United States and Canada. It says if you apply for a treaty transfer as a convict in the United States and you're a Canadian citizen, you can seek to do your time in Canada. The Americans have already said that they will support that treaty transfer. That's one of the prerequisites, and so it goes to the Minister for Public Safety, Mr. Taves, and if he too supports the treaty transfer, then Mr. Emery can do his time here in Canada. I don't think there's any reason why the Minister for Public Safety, particularly given the Americans are supporting it, would refuse that request, and so we're going to do everything we can to bring Mr. Emery home so that he can do his time here where his loved ones and his supporters are able to be there for him.
Unless Vic Taves is making an example.
Well, I don't think it's the role of the Minister for Public Safety to make examples of Canadian citizens. It's the role of the Minister for Public Safety to abide by the legislation and the treaties that are in place. The treaties say that a Canadian citizen convicted abroad has the right to apply for a treaty transfer back to Canada. There's a number of factors that are set out. Mr. Emery meets those factors. In other words, he's not a danger to the public safety of Canada. He's not a violent offender or anything of that nature. He's a guy who has engaged in political activism and is paying a very steep price for that. And so we would expect the Minister for Public Safety to make the right decision, particularly since the Americans who wanted to prosecute Mr. Emery in the first instance also support it.
Why do you not anticipate there'll be a judicial review?
So it's not my position to say what Mr. Emery's plans or what Mr. Donaldson's plans for judicial review may or may not be, but this is a situation where Mr. Emery has agreed to a plea bargain in the United States, and so at this juncture, barring something that I'm not able to foresee, it would not seem to me that judicial review would be sought.
It's kind of the condition of the plea that we wouldn't be fighting this early on. Is that kind of the logic of not going to the review?
Well, I think the main point is that the quicker Mr. Emery is convicted and sentenced in the United States, the quicker we can begin the treaty transfer process, and the quicker we can bring him back to Canada, and his wife can at least go and visit him in prison, and he can have that support of his friends and supporters right here in Canada.
How quickly would you expect him to transfer back here?
Well, impossible to put a time frame on it. Certainly, it takes some time to go through the process. It is not, I think, a situation that has a great deal of precedent to it. Mr. Emery is a pretty unique man, and this is a pretty unique situation. What I would say is that with the support of the United States for the treaty transfer, I can see no reason why the Minister for Public Safety would do anything other than accept that treaty transfer and bring Mr. Emery home.